And I thought where I would start, Eva, is taking a piece of your bio and your experience and your education and connecting that to something you advocate for, which is the higher federal minimum wage, raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I noted that you have a master's degree from the University of Economics in Bratislava, Slovakia. And what I wanted to connect here was an interesting observation that comes out of that, which is that I've often experienced that people who graduate from economics programs, get masters in economics, they often don't get the fact that somehow the economy has to have people that actually can earn a decent living if you want to have a vibrant economy. It always escapes them, partly because they're educated in these free market type programs and they come out and they think, oh, the glory of the free market will take care of everything. And yet, all these people are being paid so low wages, meaning the working people of America, that it just escapes all these economists and especially the talking heads on TV that, oh my goodness, why do we have this economy that's sort of slowing and not vibrant when you have an economy actually in the US where two-thirds of the economy is powered by consumer spending? So I'm wondering how it was that you came out of that with this progressive set of values where you seem to understand that this is about workers' ability to make a living.
Well, thank you for this question. I have to say, this is the very first time somebody asked me that question. And so I received a very typical business type of education in Slovakia. So it was between 95 and 2000. And it was all based on the typical American approach to educating students in business schools. And so I was exposed to all those ideas that you're talking about that make business students and then professionals kind of a little bit less aware about labor. But I had this wonderful class and wonderful professor, and we talk about negative externalities of the market. And even though it was very brief lesson, something stuck with me. First, the one thing that stuck with me was that we just kind of mention these what these negative externalities are, and essentially how there's really no answer to how to address those externalities. And then later when I finished my college degree and I moved to the United States and I traveled a little bit and especially traveled in this district, I saw so much poverty and I kept thinking, how come the one of the wealthiest country in the world has so many people living in poverty? I also noticed that people work really hard and long hours and hold multiple jobs, something that's quite different from the place where I grew up. People rarely juggle multiple jobs at the same time. So all that eventually led to my realization that we have to pay people enough so they can live with dignity if they work. But frankly, I really don't believe that any person should live in poverty, no matter what. There are people who are, for various reasons, not able to hold employment. Perhaps they struggle with health issues, whether it's physical or mental health issues. There are people who live in areas where there's no concentration of job opportunities. In our district, as Arizona's first congressional district, one of the counties that is in the district is Apache County, and this is the third county with the highest poverty rate in the country. Almost 40% of people living in this county live in poverty. And so I really believe that we are wealthy enough society. We can take care of everyone. People do love to work. I mean, it gives people meaning. So it's not like people want to be unemployed. But there are times when people end up without jobs. And so that's, a very long answer to a short question, perhaps.
No, no, it was a great answer, and thank you for that, for digging into that and explaining to my listeners your vision about that. And since you brought up the issue about poverty and the district that you are campaigning in, one of the things that struck me in reading up on this is that the district has more Native Americans than any other district in the country. And I connected that to something else that you did when you served on the Flagstaff City Council, which is you were instrumental in opposing uranium mining. And my memory is, and you'll correct me if I'm totally off on this, is that the uranium mining, perhaps not just in Arizona, but in other states, has especially affected Native American communities, partly because some of the Native American community members have worked in the uranium mines, but also because the uranium mines tend to be not too far from the communities, the Native American communities. And so they're affected by the uranium tailings that are left over, that are blown into their water and their wind. They breathe them in. Am I right about this?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In our district, there are a number of abandoned uranium mines, and the problem is that um, uh, we have not demanded that the companies that leave the mining operation clean up, and we have not invested enough federal dollars to clean up when private sector fails. But it's not just uranium mining, it's also other extractive industries that affect, and again, in this district, the indigenous population more than other population. Um, there is also right now a very big issue on San Carlos Apache reservation, where there is a threat of mining operations starting very near the reservation. It would be focused on copper, and this mine would be, if not the largest, among the largest in the country, and it would affect water, and it would affect also kind of the cultural heritage and the culturally sensitive land. Um, and there is a proposal to reverse land exchange that allow this mining operation to get going. And my opponent doesn't support this reverse of land exchange that would allow this area known as Oak Flats to be returned back to, federal land.
And I remember many years ago, I actually visited a copper mine in Morenci, Arizona. I don't know if Morenci is in your
Yes.
district.
Hmm.
And I remember going into the smelter, which is where they process the copper, the ore, and it was just this loud, very abusive feeling place that I assume did very bad things for the safety and health for those working in the smelter. But I assume that both in, as you point out, lots of extractive industries, they're there and they're able to pollute and there's no cleanup, especially because this is done either on or close to land where Native Americans live. And so Native Americans, at least traditionally, have not had political power. And so the federal government, these corporations have felt free to abuse the folks there.
And oftentimes, these corporations are not even U.S. corporations; they're international corporations. What I think is also we have to think about, if these extractive industries are so wonderful for the communities and bring so many jobs, how come these communities do not feel like they're thriving? If you go to these mining towns in a kind of southern part of the district, as you mentioned, Clifton, Morenci, it's not like you're finding thriving communities. The industries come, extract resources, and leave, and people, obviously they made their lives. They brought families there. It's their home, and there is nothing left. It's just I think we should really think about what responsibilities we put on the industries and on businesses, and what the world should look like after they've done with their business plan. We have just one planet, and we should really think about how these extractive industries are harming the environment, polluting water, harming the land, and ultimately also people.
And my last thought and question to you about the Native American communities, and I'm focusing especially on the Native American communities because they're so important in your district, is how much of a conversation in the community does reparations come up? That's very big, as you well know,
Hmm.
in the national conversation around African Americans and slavery. But frankly, Native Americans have been as abused as African Americans, if you look at the history of the way in which they were conquered, they were massacred, the conditions they live in, I'm wondering whether reparations comes up in the conversations you have as you travel the district.
So maybe the word reparation doesn't come up as often, but issues that the Native American communities experience today are heavily discussed. The role of what we call border towns, how indigenous people, when they come to these border towns like Flagstaff or Page or, Gallup, New Mexico, how they don't feel welcome. Racial profiling is a big issue in a city where I live, Flagstaff. 50% of all arrests are Native Americans. Uh, of course, the disrespect, the racial profiling, the land and the disrespect to land that's intrinsic to the Native American way of life is also a problem. Here in Flagstaff, we are at the foot of Arizona's largest or tallest mountain called San Francisco Peaks. And San Francisco Peaks are sacred to Native American communities, to 13 tribes. And yet we allowed uh, ski operation on that mountain, and more than just ski operation, we allowed snowmaking with uh, reclaimed water, which is considered disrespectful. And the business interests always talk about how the ski operation brings money to town and how important it is for jobs and tourism. And yet we ignore that just as important as economic benefits might be for the white population, the importance of the cultural heritage, especially in as we know what we've done for centuries to Native Americans. So, I keep asking people, what would be a just way to move forward? Native Americans, as I understand, don't necessarily like that. We have Bureau of Indian Affairs that's managing resources, or not necessarily managing resources for the best or in the best interest of the indigenous people. So I think there are a lot of questions how we can move forward and what the world can look like if it's just. I frankly think we need investments, but also it's deeper. I hear that what the kind of government we impose on native communities is a really Western type of government, and it's not what their people have known prior to the colonial forces coming to this country. So I think it's very complicated, and I think we should listen and we should start a real conversation with if we really believe that Native communities are equal partners in this country. We need to start that dialogue, in a level that is, it's both honest, but also, we commit to follow through.
And I noticed on your agenda in your issues, and my listeners can go to Eva's website, evaforcongress.com, and look at the various issues and Eva's position. She's solidly a progressive. The thing that jumped out at me, especially, was your point that you have raised and will continue to raise your voice against never ending wars that cost thousands of lives and
Mm.
obviously cost trillions of dollars. And I wonder how much of that is, and you're different in many ways from other candidates I speak to, how much of that comes from actually where you were born and raised in an area that
Mhm.
saw so much conflict over the past number of decades, including when you were, I assume, younger and a child.
Yeah, so I was 12 years old in 1989, and it was an incredibly euphoric year and or euphoric fall when we, um, knocked down the walls and got rid of the Iron Curtains, and it was an exciting time. But I remember, prior to that transition, how I was participating in a school's organized civil defense drill where all the kids had gas masks, and we were asked to put the masks on tightly, or else we would, die presumably from exposure to radiation or chemical agents. And I couldn't put that gas mask on tight enough because my head was too small. And so the kids put the gas mask on, and we marched down to the school cellar that was set up as an anti-nuclear bunker. And I was 10 years old, and I remember being terrified because I thought that the attack was imminent, and I never told any adult in my life. I never told my parents or teachers. And so here we are in this country in 2019, and we put millions of kids through active shooter drills in schools. And we kind of create this traumatic experience for another generation. And it's obviously kids in schools in this country, but also around the world, who have to live in fear because we, the adults, the political elites of this world, are unable to put people first. And we rather would prioritize the business interests of the industries that benefit from ongoing war conflict. And to me, it's despicable that half of our budget of this country goes to perpetuating that violence. And it's only because we are okay with a few giant corporations getting rich off the, war industry. And it's just, I think we have to change the way, we operate. I think this is, and it's also connected to climate change. I mean, our Department of Defense is one of the largest polluter and one of the largest culprits in climate change and global warming. The Department of Defense um, is equal, that their greenhouse gas emissions equal to the greenhouse gas emissions of 140 countries combined. So it's all connected, and of course we cannot forget that's also connected to immigration, right? Um, the conflict, whether it's caused by climate change or it's caused by war, then leads to people needing to migrate, to move to safer areas.
And so, in my last question, in our last couple of minutes here in our conversation, I wanted to just shift a little bit to the campaign itself. And one of the things that, again, you have so many specific things that are unique to you, but you're campaigning in the 10th largest geographic. Some people say it's the 11th largest district. I saw also 10th largest, doesn't matter. It's a huge district that encompasses much of Arizona outside of Phoenix and Tucson. So I kind of have a double question. One is, what's it like to campaign over this huge territory, unlike some other candidates who maybe go block to block, say in an urban area, just go and knock on doors? You
Hmm.
have to put on a lot of mileage, I assume, on your car. And that kind of goes to the question of what's your strategy about trying to win the primary in this kind of very big, sprawling district?
So yeah, you're right. It's a giant district. It's three times the size of the country where I was born in, and so it's giant. It takes 8 hours to drive north to south
Wow.
at 65 miles per hour speed. So it's huge. And so I do have to travel to the areas where there is a little bit more concentrated population. I have to visit with people. There is no replacement for candidate to voter contact. But we have to be also smart about how we run the campaign. This is perhaps the reason why time after time, this district doesn't see as many progressive candidates, or essentially rarely progressive candidates trying to run. And we are trying to do it without taking any corporate PAC money or any contributions from lobbyists. So we depend on people like your listeners to help us finance the campaign or the organization. But we are doing what other smart campaigns would do, and that means we have a good ground game, and that's volunteers around the district canvassing, volunteers phone banking. And this is the reason why we launched the campaign in mid-January, almost 2 years before the general elections, because that's what we need. We need time, and we need volunteers to help us out, and we need enough money to keep the organization growing and going. Um, so, the one good thing that has happened over the last, let's say 10 years is the growth of social media. So, while we are a large district, we can also reach people online and organize online. That doesn't necessarily mean using tons of, or buying tons of digital ads, because that's not the kind of campaign that we will able to have. But there is a way to organize online. So I just would like to encourage everybody who can to help us out. We need contributions, and you can go to evaforcongress.com. It's the easiest way. We can use volunteers, and if you are free to help us with phone banking, we would love to have you. And you can email us at info@evaforcongress.com, or just fill out the form on the website to volunteer. We hope that a lot of people will be as excited about this campaign as voters in this district are, because we are getting a lot of positive feedback.